Moving on to Nicola Sturgeon. She's accused the UK government of using trans people as a political weapon if they seek to block the gender reforms passed by the Scottish Parliament. Now, this comes as multiple reports suggest that Sunak will move to block Scotland's gender recognition law this week, using constitutional powers which will put him on course for a major clash with the Scottish government. The legislation was also backed by the Scottish Labour Party, but Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has voiced his concerns with the legislation, saying that 16 is too young for such a decision to be made. So, are Labour divided on the issue of gender? Joining me now to discuss this is political and social commentator Ling Mai. Lynn, thank you very much for joining me. I'm sorry, I'm astounded that anyone would consider that 16 would be a decent age with no checks and balances to be able to say I'm changing gender now. I mean, what is your view on this?
I'm really happy that Keir Starmer has actually come out and said it's too young. He's been flip-flopping around the trans conversation for a long time, like, what's a woman, so on and so forth. But he's taken an ardent approach here, and I think it's a really good move. For the simple fact that even if you have a look on the NHS website, they themselves say that even when it comes to puberty blockers, they don't know the effects it's going to have on bone density, on the mind of a young person. So it's definitely too young. So I'm glad that he's taken this approach.
Well, it's ridiculous that she'd even consider that this is a good thing. But then looking at it, though, this was backed by the Scottish Labour Party. I don't know what their thinking is. I don't know what on earth is going in their minds to think that this is a good thing. I just don't understand.
Yeah, well, separate to that, I do feel something for Scotland, for the simple fact that what does that say about devolution? They've got their government, but Section 35 says that they can renege on that and the UK can essentially block them. And if they're in support of this, I understand why they would be angry. But overall, 16 is far too young.
Well, I don't think this... I mean, I'm just at a guess. I'm thinking the Scottish people themselves will be saying, I don't think so. And I suspect this is going to be a vote loser for Nicola Sturgeon if she thinks that people are going to go behind it. Because why on earth... I just can't see anyone in their right mind thinking that's a good thing. It's a big decision which has further implications. Therefore, at 16... you are too young to make that sort of life-changing choice.
Exactly, and with this legislation, they don't have to declare that they're being seen by a psychologist. Again, if you look at the NHS website, there's so many different processes that have to occur before they even suggest that they can look at gender reassignment or anything of that nature. So this legislation will mean that they can just self-assign themselves to a different gender. But my thing is this. If we're saying, especially prior to Keir Starmer saying this, in the Labour Party, we don't know what a woman is. If we don't know what a woman is, we don't know what a man is, why is there a need to change gender? What are you changing from if we don't know, if we can't say what a woman is and we can't say what a man is?
And also, actually, the stereotype of gender is a social construct that we've created. So this is what a man does, this is what a woman does. We've sort of, if you don't fit into those narratives of that social construct that we have created, then you might think that you need to change gender and that you're in the wrong body simply because in your mind you believe that you behave more like a woman or that you move towards that. So I think as you get older, you start to construct your brain in a sort of more malleable way in which you start to identify with the traits that you feel comfortable with and you're not worried about whether you're called a man or a woman.
Exactly. And you cast yourself back to not long ago when you were 16.
Oh, yeah. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, yeah.
Well, when I was 16, we had a world of thoughts of what we wanted to do, what we were, and then we changed the year after and then changed again and changed again. Yeah. So how can... It's a lifelong decision and people are not having that conversation about people that are detransitioning back as well, right, because they didn't go through the necessary checks in the process.
Well, it's not just that as well, because it actually opens this out now to any predator who wants to then say, I'm a woman when you're not a woman, but you're a predator. It opens it out to the whole prison idea as well. Exactly. And people might then do this change in Scotland and then come to the UK with it. So they'll use it as a bit like the Greta Green sort of thing, the Greta Green effect, where you can go there, get married, and then quickly, instead of you'd have to go there to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, listen, Miley, thank you very much for... Did I get that right? No, it's Ling Mai.
Yeah, Ling Mai.
Ling Mai. See, all of it wrong. All of it totally wrong. Thank you so much. Right, some breaking news to bring you onto this topic. The UK government has decided to block the Scottish gender bill designed to make it easier for people to change their legally recognised gender. Let's get the latest with our political reporter, Olivia Utley. Olivia, we were just talking about it now.
Yes, so this is an unprecedented move from the UK government. It's enacted Section 35, which will essentially put a block on Royal Assent of this bill, which was agreed in Holyrood last year. We expected this was coming, but that doesn't really make it any less of a sort of constitutional bomb, if you like. Essentially, what Alistair Jack's argument is, who's the Scottish Secretary, is that that there will be a UK-wide impact which, with the gender recognition bill, which wouldn't be compatible with the English Equalities Act. And you could have a situation where someone who is facing awaiting trial for sexual offences, a male body person awaiting trial in Scotland, getting a gender recognition certificate there, being tried in England and ending up going to a women's prison. He also raised concerns in his letter to Nicola Sturgeon about the effect on women in Scotland too. And we know that this bill was hugely controversial. It was rushed through Holyrood late last year. I went to the second reading of it, and the atmosphere was just electric. I mean, there were nearly 100 women in the room wearing suffragette colours, protesting at every opportunity. And they felt as though this was being rushed through essentially because Nicola Sturgeon wanted to pick a fight with the Westminster government and wanted to create this kind of constitutional chaos. It feels as though if this was a trap that Nicola Sturgeon has set, the UK government has walked into it, although it's hard to see how they could avoid doing so. Essentially, creating legislation this controversial with this UK-wide impact was always going to mean that the UK government basically had to step in. But of course, you've now got Nicola Sturgeon and Stephen Flynn, the SNP man in Westminster, claiming that this is, even if you don't agree with the issue of gender, this is an issue for Scottish democracy. And they are framing it as the UK government is putting a roadblock on Scotland's democratic will.
Very interesting that she's trying to position it that way, but I suspect the Scottish people will probably be on the side of the English on this one. I doubt they'll like it. Lynn, I'm going to ask you for some your thoughts on this then, because, I mean, we were just talking about it. It's breaking
I'm
news.
glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad. And I do think, and I agree, that Nicola Sturgeon has done this as a sort of angst against against Westminster, essentially, and she's politicised it. So I'm glad that Rishi Sunak has found himself and done what is necessary.
Well, Olivia, do you think that this could be... Because I know that Nicola Sturgeon probably, I mean, potentially has done this as a sort of ploy to try and show that actually Scotland should be independent and not be controlled by Westminster. But could it backfire on her? Because the Scottish people probably, I would suggest, the majority probably agree with the English.
Well, it might not be as straightforward as that. Essentially, what the polls in Scotland show about the Gender Recognition Act isn't so much that people are against it, it's mainly that people don't really understand what it is. They're not interested in the issue. And that's not really surprising when you look at the figures. So last year, for example, 30 people in Scotland gained a gender recognition certificate. And the Scottish Government expects that that could rise to around 250 or 300 if this legislation were to go ahead. So it affects a very tiny proportion of the population. So most of Scotland isn't particularly interested in it. What Nicola Sturgeon is hoping and banking on is that she will go to the Scottish people and say, essentially, that Britain has put a roadblock on Scotland's democracy, therefore you should vote for independence. They will see that Section 35 has been enacted. They will see that Alistair Jack saying no to legislation that was passed in Holyrood. And without really understanding what the legislation is, they will support her claim for independence. Of course, Rishi Sunak is hoping that people just find the bill very strange and unnecessary and don't like it and therefore side with the English. But it's a tricky game.
Well, we'll see. I mean, perhaps the Scottish people will be more interested in exactly what it is. Let's hope they are. Olivia Utley, thank you very much. And also, Lynn May. I got it right, finally. I got it right.